I want to welcome everyone to Woman City Club's first forum of the year 2023. I'm really excited about this particular program on affordable housing, which is one of our very important topics that we spend a lot of our energy on. And I'm really glad that we're able to have yet another program on affordable housing. This one entitled Strategies for Places to Call Home. Susan Noonan is going to be our MC, but before that, I want to give you a few housekeeping pieces of information. If you're not speaking, please try to mute. I may help you out by muting you if I see that that your dog is barking or somebody's talking to you and you don't realize you're unmuted. We'll try to take care of those, and let's hope that nobody's offended by that. Let's see. For Q, let's see. We're using the chat for questions and answers, so feel free to put things in the chat if you don't feel like speaking yourself, and we'll be glad to have somebody ask those. We do our best to cover as many questions that come up in the chat as we can, but sometimes we get a lot of questions and we can't hit them all. So we'll do our best to accommodate everybody's interests. And then this court, as it says, we are recording this, and it is going to go out on our website as a YouTube recording. And also, everybody who's registered will get the ability. They'll get the link to the recording. They'll also have the ability through that to see, like, if there have been other questions answered or other materials that the speakers have decided to share about this. So it's a real good thing that you've registered and that we have your email addresses so that we keep you informed about the issues. So that's all I have, and I'd like to introduce Susan Noonan, who is our speakers.
Maybe. I don't know what you're asking for.
All right, we need to ask everybody to please mute.
On this, yeah.
I think we're getting some background noise from one of our phone calls, so we have to ask you to please.
Recording in progress.
I think that was a double phone and computer or something. So,
Yeah, that happens a lot if people have both of them on at once.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you. If you could keep muted throughout, that would be wonderful, so we don't have any distractions. Okay. So the biggest distraction will probably be my dog barking, which I've asked my husband to please take care of. So tonight we're really excited to have this esteemed panel of experts on affordable housing and homelessness. So before we start, I don't know what that was.
There was somebody coming off mute.
Okay, so Alice, do your job, keep people on mute. I would like to, I know you all know some of our panelists, but I really want everybody to know a few facts about each of them. So I am going to start by introducing all four panelists, and we will then let each one of them speak. And please put your questions in the chats as they're speaking, and you come up with questions. And we're going to wait and ask them all at the end because we want every panelist to have a chance to speak. So all the questions will be at the end. Okay. So I'm going to start with our first panelist, who will be Council Member Jan-Michele Lemon Kearney. Just a few facts. You all know her, but she is a proud graduate of Cincinnati Public Schools. She then graduated cum laude from Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, earning a master's degree in counseling and consulting psychology from Harvard after that, Harvard Graduate School, and then a law degree from Harvard, where she was elected first-class marshal and gave the commencement speech. Of course. She's an entrepreneur who owns a multimedia publishing company, Sesh Communications. I think we all know that. Includes ownership of the award-winning Cincinnati Herald newspaper. Over the years, she served so many different organizations in our city, like the NAACP, YWCA, Walnut Hills Alumni Foundation, Greater Cincinnati Association of Black Journalists, Women's City Club, of course, and Center for Independent Living Options, and many other organizations. But Jan-Michele is married to former Senator Eric Kearney. We have to mention that. They have two wonderful children, Celeste and Asher, and she is honored to serve the residents of the city as a council member. And we're honored to have you as a council member.
And vice mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. And vice mayor, I should say that. Yeah, sorry.
I'm really honored. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So why wasn't that in your bio? Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
Sorry. what the wonderful thing is that we are informal, the Women's City Club. So next, our second speaker will be Robie Suggs, who is the Chief Lending Officer of the Cincinnati Development Fund. You may not all know her. She is the money handler. Mrs. Suggs is responsible for all lending-related activity, including loan processing, underwriting, construction management, credit risk asset management. She builds and maintains strong relationships with developers, nonprofits, business owners, and financial partners to originate, underwrite, and close loans in support of Cincinnati Development Fund's mission and the resident-driven community plans, which you will hear about tonight. She came to CDF from First Financial Bank, where she was a vice president of strategic partnerships, economic development, and community outreach. Robie has been a VP of many other banks. She's worked at many banks, National, First Financial, PNC, Provident Bank, National City Bank. So we're really glad that she's now a Cincinnati Development Fund, and she has many board involvements, and she has a whole lot of awards and recognitions, which I'm not even going to begin. All I'm going to say is we're just thrilled to have you on our panel tonight, Robie. So thanks for being here. Our third panelist will be Kevin Finn, who is the founding president and CEO of Strategies to End Homelessness, hereafter known as SEH, for my benefit. Excuse me. So in collaboration with an integrated network of over 30 homeless service providers, the organization's goal is to maximize the impact of funding from federal, state, local government agencies, as well as local community investment. So Kevin has worked on homeless issues for 20 years plus. He began his career as a street outreach worker for teenagers experiencing homelessness. And that's where I met Kevin, in Corryville, walking the streets. So as a result of that, he understands homelessness is very difficult. Temporary situation for most people has a multitude of causes and solutions. So his organization is the one that brings in all the funds. It's the infrastructure required by HUD, the biggest funder of housing, homelessness, and so forth. So Kevin has a bachelor's degree in psychology from St. Louis University and master's in social work from UK. He's a Cincinnati native, as is Jan-Michele, has 2 children. So we're glad you're here, Kevin. And
thanks for having me.
yeah, you're welcome. And I'll never forget those Corryville streets.
Hey, I was a street outreach worker. You might have to explain to this group why you were walking the
Oh,
streets.
you're right. Oh, yeah. I'm not going to tell. Anyway, and last but certainly not least, we have Josh Spring. Now, a lot of you may not know that Josh has lived and seen poverty in both rural Kentucky's Appalachian Mountains, and then moved to Louisville, where he saw urban poverty. And then when he was in high school, his family moved to Cincinnati, and he saw another part of society by attending a wealthy suburban school. And he realized that folks in the suburbs didn't have any connection or knowledge of what was happening in the cities or the country. That's when he was confronted by the attitudes that people who are poor brought it on themselves. And that was not something he could believe in. So wanting to find ways to combat poverty, he applied to Xavier's social work program. And while there, he worked part-time at Tender Mercies and heard the personal stories from people experiencing homelessness. So after graduation, he worked as a social worker for tenants of low-income community projects, housing projects, and over the Rhine. And he realized that his suburban high school classmates had assumed wrongly, and that these people did not bring poverty on themselves. So in 2009, when the position of executive director came available, he applied, got the job at the Greater Cincinnati Coalition for the Homeless, and he has been there since. He coordinates 50 organizations working with the homeless in Hamilton County. And the goal is to give people the resources to improve their own condition and then step aside and let them do the work themselves. So the goal of everybody here is to find affordable housing for the people who most need it. And that's what we're going to hear about tonight. How is that happening? So we'll start with Jan-Michele.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Susan. A great introduction for everyone. Let me just say, first of all, to the Women's City Club, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really, really honored to be here and to be here with these outstanding people, Robie and Kevin and Josh, 3 people for whom I have a ton of respect. They are all just really awesome. And I've learned a lot from all 3 of them. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all 3 of them as well. Everybody's just doing great work. And, as a city council member, we all depend on their work a lot. So let me get to the reason you asked me to come and speak is to say some of the things that the city is doing in terms of affordable housing. Let me just quickly, I love the fact that in your intro, Josh, you said that, a lot of people, I guess they blame the victim. And so, we have to just take a quick look at the history of racism as kind of how we got here. Why do we have some of these problems that we have? And some people just don't understand that it's not, people aren't choosing poverty. They're not choosing homelessness. I mean, it's something that's happened and it's really systemic. And so just going back to, 2 quick examples, post-World War II, when our veterans were coming home, the government had low interest mortgage loans for veterans so that they could buy homes, they could get housing. But unfortunately, those low interest mortgage loans were only for the white veterans, and they were basically denied to most of the Black vets. So the Black veterans missed that opportunity to climb into the middle class and build generational wealth. And that's one example. And then you look at, you can go back farther to the 1930s when this redlining practice started as a way to draw red lines around Black and brown neighborhoods to label them as too risky for loans. And so redlining was legal until 1968, although, we still hear about it today. And the vestiges of redlining are still with us. Black home ownership is low and there's a widening wealth gap. Home ownership, real estate has been a way that families for generations built wealth. And so we've missed out on that. And so there's a lot of poverty in Black and brown neighborhoods. And so a lot of people just cannot afford housing. I know a lot of people read the study by Lisk and CBI back from 2017, where they surveyed the affordable housing landscape and found that Cincinnati needs about 25,000 units. It's a lot. So let me, as I talk about what the city is doing with affordable housing, let me just go back to Josh and Kevin and say, really, their work has really changed the culture in City Hall. I was telling, I say this all the time. I know that when Josh and his group put issue 3 on the ballot before, it didn't succeed, but what it did do was put the pressure on to have more of a focus on affordable housing. And so that was the previous administration. This administration came in, Mayor Aftab and the current council, and they were talking about affordable housing before they even got into City Hall. And so, I was there for the transition from one group to the other, and you could see the whole culture changing. And within City Hall, that everybody said, this is a problem we're going to have to really prioritize. So we've got to prioritize affordable housing. And so there's a big change in it. And part of it is really monetary, the money that's being put into, I'm going to call it the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but in a minute, I'm going to explain, and Robbie's going to do an even better job of explaining. It's really the fund of funds because they're funds from different sources. It's not just one trust fund. But let me just go back for a minute and explain what I mean by affordable, because affordable has a lot of different definitions. But generally, when we're talking about affordable, we mean that it's not more than 1/3 of the household income. Not more than 1/3 of household income goes to housing. So rent or mortgage plus utilities. Another term you're gonna hear a lot is AMI. We always talk about AMI, and that's area median income. And so just so people understand for that, the federal government establishes the income limits for households intending to occupy affordable housing. And so the area median income is set by HUD. And it's, for example, for a family of 4 in the Cincinnati metropolitan statistical area, it's 81,300. And so just to give you, because we're going to talk a lot about 80% AMI, 60% AMI, 30% AMI. So for a family of 4, 80% AMI is about $65,000 a year. And I'm just kind of rounding these off. 60% AMI for a family of 4 is only $48,000 a year, and 30% AMI is about $34,000. And by my calculation, if you're at 30% AMI, you're probably making about $9 an hour. So you can just imagine, $9 an hour is not really getting you very far. So we looked, and the list study, for example, showed, and I know Josh will talk a lot about this, but the greatest need, of course, is 60% or lower, and especially at the 30% level. And, it's kind of obvious why, the cost of building units is going to be the same no matter, what the residents are making, right? And so when you have less rent, you have less money to actually repay debt on a project. And so it costs more to actually build at the lower AMI level. But that's where the greatest need is. And so let me just tell you about some of the city's finance tools. So one is, it's called NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability. It's really federal money that goes to the state, comes to the city. And I'm going to tell you about how we've made progress there. And then also the affordable housing, it used to be called the trust fund, but we call it fund of funds because it's really a lot of funds. It's managed by the Cincinnati Development Corporation. So Robbie's going to talk about that. Thank you, Robbie. And right now, the Cincinnati Development Fund is managing for us more than $100 million for affordable housing. We just made our first distribution from the Cincinnati Development Fund for the Slater project. It was $1.88 million, and that's to build 62 units at 30% AMI. Let me just give you a few highlights of the first year of this administration in terms of affordable housing. And so let me grab those. Let's see, I've got notes all over the place here. Okay, so just a few things the city has done, and I know there'll be questions about all this later, so I'll just kind of go through it. So we created the first annual sustainable stream of revenue for affordable housing. So from the carryover, or, we call it waterfall, from the waterfall from the budget, up to $5 million a year has to go into affordable housing trust fund. And, we've made record investments in this fund. I'm going to go through those numbers in a minute to kind of explain how we got to that 100 million number. We've incentivized the creation of 463 units of housing at or below 60% AMI, which is a big increase because in previous years, the average has been maybe 250 units per year. We plan to increase it even more. But just so you know, we're making progress. I mean, we're going in the right direction, but it can never quite be fast enough. So we also are doing things, I talked about home ownership. So we've increased funding for the American Dream Down Payment Initiative. It's called ADDI, ADDI, and it's where we help low and moderate families with down payment assistance when they're trying to purchase a home. Getting that down payment is a big obstacle for a lot of folks. And so we've increased the funding for the ADDI fund from the city and also expanded it. So the down payment assistance can be up to about $15,000, which really helps. I think it was about $5,000 before. And And then, as you know, Councilmember Reggie Harris reformed the low-income housing tax credit. He streamlined the process to make it more accessible and to speed up the process. You know, the whole thing that happens with development is the longer it takes, you know, the more prices go up. And so to streamline the process has been a plus. We also, with the carryover budget, we put money in to do special code enforcement because a lot of especially the out-of-state landlords who buy up a lot of properties but don't take care of them. So the idea is to start coming down harder on them with code enforcement. And also we have a proposal to partner with legal aid so that tenants can get legal resources as well as more legal assistance. So those are some of the things we're doing in terms of trying to bring more equity to the system. Okay, so let me flip through my notes because I want to tell you about some of the projects, but maybe next let me just look at this and tell you about, I should have actually put this so I could put this on the screen, but this is where the 100 million number comes from. And so the city of Cincinnati, for example, put in 12.75 million, and that's gone to different sources. For example, and I hope you're not glazing over as I'm reading all of this. I just want you to hear a little bit about it. So let me just say this, the original Affordable Housing Trust Fund was Fund 439. I know Josh is going to talk about this because this is something we not really argue about, but, you know, debate about a lot. So 60%, this is for 60% AMI or below, and half of the funds have to go to 30% AMI. So there's not a whole lot there, only 1,300 in that particular fund. But that's really because, you know, we were advised that, you know, restrictions can hurt development of affordable housing. For example, you know, we just talked about how expensive it is. And so one of the ideas, and I know Robie can talk more about this, is that if you limit it to 60% or below, there might be a development where some of it is 80%, but because it's 80%, they can afford to also put in some 30% units. And so the idea was not to make it so limiting. And so there are other funds like, you know, so the city put in 12.75, and that was just one piece of it. There's also, I won't go through all these, you know, there's the CSR tax credit, you know, from the railroad, there's city capital budget, that was 2 million. There was some art money, that was 5 million. From the carryover this past year, we put in another 5 million. And then a few years ago, we were able to get a Section 108 loan from HUD, and it's low cost debt, and that was 34 million. I know Commissioner Driehaus was going to try to jump on the call. The county has put aside 40 million for affordable housing, and in the Cincinnati Development Fund, you know, the fund that we're talking about that Robie and her group manage, of that 40 million, there's 33.5 million. And so, and then there are private investments too, Mercy Health, Health Path, Eagle, Western Southern, and then there's, you know, CDF Enterprise Capital. So all these together ends up being a little more than $100 million, and they do address different levels. The money from the county, those are grants, and therefore 65% AMI or lower. So hopefully that's helpful. I know it's kind of confusing, but I want people to understand that there is money. The Cincinnati Development Fund is managing for us more than $100 million for affordable housing. And as I said, we just made our first distribution from that fund for the Slater project, which is 62 units at that low level of 30% AMI. So those are the people I was talking about. For a family of four, they're probably making about $9 an hour. And so housing is really a big issue. So a few other tools, just to mention, you know, they're tax incentives. Some people have probably heard that the administration has proposed a 3-tier tax abatement program. And this one is for residential, so that's 1 to 4 families. And we're going to talk about that in the Equitable Housing Committee. So I hope you join us for that. And that's next Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Commercial reform is coming. We'll be hearing about that soon. So I don't have an update on that yet. Tax abatements for commercial properties, and also zoning reform is coming. The idea of the 3-tier program, and that's probably a whole nother conversation, but it's to make the tax abatements more equitable and to incentivize development in neighborhoods that aren't being invested in, and to have less incentives in the neighborhoods where there's already a lot of investment. So, and let me just say this, while working on affordable housing, we're also working on lifting our residents out of poverty, because that's important too. So we're creating equitable development opportunities. You guys know we have all these big projects, convention center, and in fact, the convention center district, the Brent Spence Bridge, the Western Hills Viaduct, infrastructure things that are happening. And we want to make sure that our MBE, our minority businesses, and our women-owned businesses, our smaller businesses, start to get a piece of the pie of these larger projects. And so we're looking at obstacles like bonding and how the city can help these smaller companies get bonded so that they can take on larger projects. We're also looking at mentorship so that the larger companies mentor the smaller ones and help them to grow, and also access to capital, because if you're a smaller company, you don't have all that cash flow, but you've got to pay your workers, and it takes a long time to get paid, and sometimes it's just not the cash flow to actually manage these larger projects. And so we are starting an access to capital fund in the city as well. Also programs like career pathways, which is a way of, and those are a lot of different training programs, but a way of helping our residents to get training and jobs, especially in the building trades, where there's lots of work, and it's a career that that really pays well. So so those are just some of the things that are happening, and I'll talk more about some of this later. But maybe that's enough of an intro as to where we are. And I know you don't just want to hear from me, you want to hear from everybody else. So that's the start. But just to tell you, the city is really committed. The culture, the commitment for affordable housing in City Hall is strong. And let me also mention the Mueller Commission. Well, we'll talk about that later because I know Josh is going to bring that up. So, right, Josh? All right. Okay, we'll talk about that later. So I'm going to stop there just to take a break and give other people a chance to talk. But, just in final words for that intro, just to say the city, our mayor, the city council, our administration, everybody's working to see how we can move forward affordable housing. And so it's very encouraging.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that great update of what the city's doing. It does. I did learn some things. It sounds like they're really trying hard, doing a lot, as you said, a lot more than the last administration, and we're grateful for that. And we'll keep the pressure on. So next we're going to hear from Robie Suggs, who will give us a little eyeful of how these financial issues actually develop an affordable how we can, what the challenge is building for the lower income people when units cost the same. So Robie, I'm going to let you go from here. And Jeff, I think Robie might want to share screen. Is that correct?
I would like to, if I'm able to.
Okay. Jeff, you hear me?
You're set up so that you should be able to if you hit the share screen. There you
Okay.
go.
All right.
We've
So,
allowed it.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much, Women's Club. I've attended sessions and I'm just really excited to actually be part of one this time. So I appreciate the invitation. So I'm going to go through this really quickly, but just a little bit about who Cincinnati Development Fund is we've been around for quite some time. We are trying to share this as a PowerPoint, but
Well,
okay. Yeah, I was trying to do a slideshow, but it's not seeming
Up
like
top?
it's.
Oh,
Yeah, I can't
can't
get to that.
Okay.
That's okay. We'll just do this. So basically, Cincinnati Development Fund, we've been around since 1988. We do a lot of our work. A lot of our work started in Over the Rhine, and we still do a lot of work there. But we are all over the place. We can lend in the entire state of Ohio. We can do Northern Kentucky and some parts of Indiana. So we do have a great geographic reach. But I just want to tell you that our heart is Cincinnati. What we want to talk about too is like the need for affordable housing. We've talked about it, and it's a math problem. What I think a lot of people say, well, you're getting $100 million. You should be able to make this work. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that it's a math problem. So it costs the exact same amount to do affordable housing projects as it does to do market rate projects. So the rents usually for a market rate project, the monthly rents pay for the work that has to be done on a project and the ongoing repairs that have to be made. When the affordable housing properties have to be built and or repaired, the rents generally don't support that amount. So it's difficult to have work done when you're not getting enough rents to support the project. So again, the Fund of Funds was created. Thank you, Jan-Michele, for introducing that. We realized that we have to get funds from a lot of different places. One source will not do it all. And so we look at different ways to find funding. We were doing this prior to the Fund of Funds anyway, but the Funds of Funds, what this has done is it allows us to do leveraging of funds that we have coming in. So it's not just one place that we're getting funds. We can actually go out to foundations and banks and say, hey, you should be wanting to be part of this great opportunity. And a lot of them say, yes, absolutely, we do. And so we're able to get additional funds from them. So as I mentioned before, this is it's a problem for residents, but it's also a problem for developers because you have the small developers like Jan-Michele mentioned, and they don't have the same opportunities to get funds from different places. So for a large developer, basically they, no, this is going to work or not, but they can get funds from any place. It's not going to let me do this because we're not on sharing. I mean, not on, it's okay. So they can get funds from any place. Just say if there are 3 sources of funds, a big D developer, they can get their funds from any place. A smaller developer can probably only get funds from one place. So that keeps them out of the ability to do more work because they can't get the funds that are necessary. With everything being aggregated through Cincinnati Development Fund, there's one place to shop for these funds for the big D and the small d. And one of the things that we realize is that not only are the smaller developers having problems, but it's also minority developers are having even more problems. So one of the things we did is we created a program that supports the smaller and minority developers with a line of credit that helps them to be able to play in the same space as the bigger developer. So a smaller developer, they'll have the equity that they have into one project, but they can't scale. They can't move on to the next one because all of their funds, all of their equity is into this one project. Yeah. So we created a line of credit that it can be secured or unsecured so that we can support their endeavors to move themselves forward and to be able to compete in a more equitable way. With the why this really matters to us is because it's important that we think about this as a holistic concern and not just a one focused mission. And so we look at places where we can do multiple fundings, where we can get low cost loans that are, of course, those have to be paid back because Cincinnati Development Funds will actually borrow funds from a financial institution or foundation at a lower cost, but those funds have to be paid back. Grants can actually be put out as longer term patient capital that may or may not have to come back to be reused. Those opportunities are not as prevalent as the low cost loans are concerned, but at either way, we can blend these funds together and make sure that we're supplying the funds that are needed to do these affordable housing developments. So Jan-Michele mentioned before about the sources of funds. And what I did is I broke these down into grants and to loans so that you understand that some of them are actually out there, the grant funds that it can be left out for a period of time or maybe never repaid. And then the number of funds that are actually loans. As you can see, there are more loans than there are grants. And those are the ones that those funds can't be put at as much risk because Cincinnati Development Fund is on the hook to pay those off because those funds are lent to us. So we can lend them out, but we expect them to be repaid because we have to repay them. And then at the very bottom, you'll see CDF's own capital. We have our own money that we do put into this fund as well. So we put our own funds at risk as part of the development for the fund of funds and affordable housing as a whole. So we leverage these funds, as I mentioned.
The housing thing.
I'm sorry, I don't know if that was a question.
Yeah,
or...
Dawn, could you please mute your phone?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. So what we do is we're able to pool funds together and then we can leverage them. And one of the things that we can do is we can also provide speed in this process, because one of the things that we're finding out is some of these deals have been sitting on the shelf for some time and they need to be moved along. There's a significant gap and we're trying to move as quickly as we can to fill those. Jan-Michele mentioned Slater Hall. This was an excellent example of what can happen when we put our heads together, figure out what needs to be done. And the city was extremely helpful in making this happen because it wasn't, it was the first thing we did out of the block, and we were able to make that work. So really happy about that. So eligible uses. So generally, you know, the same as any other project is acquisition, hard costs, soft costs, new and rehab. And as I mentioned before, we have some geographic areas that we can work in. The city money that needs to be used in the city. Hamilton County is all Hamilton County. So that includes the city plus outlining areas. Think of your first ring suburbs. And we also try to find other ways that we can benefit municipalities that may have not realized that they can utilize these funds as well. And the terms are usually 15 to 20 years, depending on the source. So we talked about the affordable housing and what that generally means for the ability for someone to purchase a home based on the funding that they have. But the city is using these guidelines that are on this slide to determine what that looks like. And that's based on a motion that was put through and approved through City Council. So basically, CDF, you know, I mentioned we've been around since '88. So we're experienced at what we do. We have practices and procedures in place for vetting borrowers and developments themselves to make sure they're the right place to put the funds. We're embedded in community development. As mentioned before, I'm on a lot of boards and committees. I'm actually on Kevin's board, but there are a lot of places that I've been involved in for 20 plus years. And these are places where we find out where development is happening, working with CDCs and trying to support them as much as possible. Another board that I recently joined is over around community housing, which I'm extremely proud to be there because of the work that Mary's been doing for so long. Before I was asked to join her board, I had admired them for so long for the work they've been doing. But these are the places that we find out where we can support and what we can do, and having those relationships, building those relationships and managing those to make sure that CDF is seen as a go-to organization to support this type of development. We're for full service. We do the origination, the underwriting, we do the servicing. We don't sell our loans. We keep our loans and we service them through CDF. And we're able to find places where, again, where we can raise more funds, and to do what we need to do to help this fund to grow and not just remain stagnant. Again, I talked about we're leveraging these funds to fill the gaps, because that's, you know, where the gaps are. Again, I mentioned that affordable and market rate projects cost the same, but the rents for affordable do not support the lending or rehab or anything that needs to be done on affordable housing. You know, one of the things that we're doing as part of our strategy is we're looking at ways to fill gaps on LIHTC projects, NOFA, and others. There's a growing number of 4% LIHTC projects that are coming on board that we're working through. And then equity bridge loans. Those are really important for some of this work. And there's not necessarily a lot of traditional banking that will play in that space. We're also doing, looking at smaller projects. We feel that, again, the smaller developer has just as much right to be in the space to help develop these properties as the larger developers do. In fact, we will get much more done when we help encourage smaller developers to enter into the space. You have developers that are in it because that's where their heart is, and we can help support them to do the work that they want to do. We also do mixed income projects. So some of the properties will, or some of the units will be affordable, some of them will be market rate, but that's okay. It's okay for everyone to to live together. They don't have to just be one or the other. They can live together and make this work. So that's one of the things that we're really proud to be part of as well. And then we're looking at what we can do to continue this work. I just shared some information about things that we've done previously. And then knowing that, you know, our fiscal year end, we've done a considerable number of units already, and 292 out of 364 have been affordable. And then the next couple of pages are just some things that we've done recently that, you know, we're proud to say that we've had some small way to help these developments to get going and to remain sustainable. So in summary, those are the things I spoke about before. I'm not going to go over them again. You know, we're looking forward to what 23 and beyond brings to us. People who are interested in finding out more, actually applying for funds, can certainly reach out to us at our website. We are now working through the process of creating an RFP for folks to actually apply for funding from these from the fund of funds. And again, we have applications in hand already, but we certainly know that there's a lot more that are out there, that if people know about the funds and how to apply for them, that they will reach out to us and do so. So we know that there's a lot of projects that are still out there. And again, I deeply appreciate the opportunity to share what we're doing. We look forward to, you know, having additional discussions about this. And we know affordable housing does not stop here. $100 million sounds like an awful lot of money, but it is not enough to solve the problem. And those of us in this work absolutely know that. So we just appreciate the fact that people are hearing this information and understanding that there's a lot of work to do, and there's definitely more funding needed. So thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robie and Robie. And I know we have a lot of questions coming in the chats, but for me, you explained a lot of why we can't just build all the affordable housing that we need at one time. And I thank you for that. So we're going to go next to Kevin Finn, and Kevin is going to detail a little bit about how the lack of affordable housing leads to homelessness, how difficult it is for homeless people to regain a place to live with so little affordable housing that we have around here. So, Kevin.
Again, my thanks to the Women's City Club for having me. I have a lot of respect for the work that the Vice Mayor, that Robie, and that Josh are doing around affordable housing. So it's, you know, an honor to be asked to sit here with all of them. I think we all occupy sort of very different spaces as it pertains to affordable housing. So as you mentioned in your intro for me, a big part of what my organization, Strategies to End Homelessness, does is we coordinate funding for homeless services. So we coordinate funding from the federal government, specifically the Department of Housing and Urban Development, from the state of Ohio, Hamilton County levy funds and stimulus funds. And then also we receive a certain amount of city human services funding as well that goes into shelter diversion. And we pass through funding, which is primarily what we do. We pass through funding once it's secured to about 20 other organizations. And then we work with some additional organizations, even though they're not involved in taking the funding. Since we've mentioned several times, that different funding sources have a lot of restrictions on them, I just can't resist the opportunity to share my biggest frustration, which is the money that we receive from HUD, which is about $26 million a year. HUD only considers a person to be homeless if they are already on the street, in a shelter, or fleeing domestic violence. And we can only use HUD funding to help them when they are already in one of those positions. So said another way, we're not allowed to do anything with that money to prevent people from getting to the point where they're on the street, in a shelter, or fleeing domestic violence. So that's my biggest pet peeve, and my job is trying to negotiate those limitations on that biggest pot of funding that we administer. So anyway, in addition to passing through these dollars to a variety of different agencies, we also administer what is called the Homeless Management Information System. Hamilton County was actually the first community in the country to have 100% of its homeless service organizations contributing data to the same data system. So we have about 12 years of data that we can look at, that is from every street outreach program, every emergency shelter, all of the supportive housing programs for people who have experienced homelessness. Also, we oversee something called shelter diversion, which is a service for people who are doubled up, sleeping couch to couch, and running out of couches to sleep on. So we also have data on the people who are in those sorts of positions and reaching out for assistance. We have a 5-year partnership with 8451, the data analytics company downtown, to make sure that we're getting as much out of that data as we possibly. So the reason I stress the data is that we see in the data all the time that a lot of the myths that people buy into as to why people are homeless are not true. The vast majority of homeless people do not have drug or alcohol problems. The vast majority of people experiencing homelessness are not mentally ill. Some of the things that people like to chalk homelessness up to are issues that affect less than half of the people who are experiencing homelessness in Hamilton County. And in fact, the number one cause of why people are homeless is they simply can't afford housing. It is across the board, it is an affordable housing issue. We live in a community where we are surrounded by people who are at risk of homelessness and don't even necessarily realize it. People who are paying 50, 60% of their income to keep a roof over their head. And perhaps when they're getting plenty of hours at work, or things are going along very smoothly, they don't even necessarily recognize themselves that that's problematic to be spending that much of your money on housing. But then as soon as, somebody who's paying 60% of their income to keep a roof over their head, as soon as their hours get cut in half at work, what's the one thing you can't pay for at that point? Or, they have an illness and miss some time at work. The housing is the very first thing that there's no way for them to pull the dollars together to pay for. So many people in our community are at risk of becoming homeless, or at least beginning a descent that might lead them toward the street or a shelter. And they may not even realize it. Then a lot of as I mentioned, a lot of the money that we administer goes to help people after they have already been homeless. So a lot of the organizations we fund, Tender Mercies, the YWCA, Goodwill, Talbert House, Shelter House, Lighthouse, all the house, Bethany House, they have housing programs that we fund that are intended to help people get out of homelessness and back into housing. But, we don't want to set people up for failure. We don't want them moving into units that they have no chance of being able to eventually afford on their own. So the number one obstacle that our partner agencies face in getting people back out of homelessness and into housing is the cost of housing. The lack of affordable housing for people to move into. And that results in people staying homeless longer than they would have otherwise, experiencing additional trauma of homelessness, that maybe they would not have experienced otherwise. So those are, the sort of imminent effects of the lack of affordable housing, is that we're surrounded by people who are at risk of homelessness. And we also have shelters full of people who are ready to move back out into housing and simply can't find an affordable unit to move into. We actually, through these various programs that we oversee, on any given day, we have about 300 households who have a deposit and several months rent in hand that cannot find a unit that they can afford. So, it's not like we're asking property owners in that to, give units away for free or something like that. I mean, even when people have a rental subsidy and a deposit in hand, it is not necessarily easy to help them find an affordable unit. Something I think that is, interesting, though, we've seen a sort of interesting case study over the last couple of years. We actually have seen modest declines during the pandemic in the number of people entering the shelters and who have been encountered by our street outreach workers on the street. We've actually seen declines in the overall number of people in those situations. And I don't think it's any coincidence that that happens during a window of time when, for really the first time in a long time, there has been money available to help people with rent. The COVID funding, was really, that has been available over the last couple of years, has really been the first time that anything that I could describe as prevention has been made available on any scale of any sort. And lo and behold, the number of people walking into shelters and on the street goes down. So I think, the problem we have is there's not enough available that prevents people from experiencing homelessness in the first place. And really the ultimate way to prevent homelessness and not have people, even end up on the verge or experience any trauma related to the loss of housing would be to simply have enough affordable housing for people on the front end. So the number one cause, from what we can see from all the data, is it's the lack of affordable housing that is the reason why people end up at risk of or experiencing homelessness, and why we can't get them out of homelessness. I do think it's worth noting, though, that I mentioned these modest decreases. A lot of that COVID funding is just now, over the last couple of months, really disappearing. So I'm not optimistic that any of that is going to continue, because these resources that have perhaps helped prevent people from finding themselves on the street or in a shelter, those resources are going away. That's basically everything I had at this point. I'm happy to take questions after Josh has had his turn. Susan, you're muted.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate it. I appreciate you telling me I was muted too. And lastly, we are going to hear Josh explain to us what the ballot issue that's being considered by his agency and Cincinnati Action for Housing Now consists of. And because our membership wanted to know what it was about. Just, we're not making any decisions on whether we support it or not, but we just wanted some information about the ballot issue. And we appreciate you coming on to share that with us, Josh.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. I want to set things up so that the charter amendment I'm going to talk about makes sense. The report that Jan-Michele referred to that was put out by Xavier University in 2017 said in the city of Cincinnati, we need 28,000 affordable homes. We're short 28,000. And specifically that we need those homes to be affordable at 30% of the county's median income or lower. That's roughly $18,000 a year. That means we need approximately 28,000 homes in our city that's affordable to households with incomes of $18,000 a year or less. In our city, if you just do some simple work looking at census data and you say, okay, of all of the households in our city, homeowners, renters, all of the households that are paying more than 30% of their income in housing, so they cannot afford the home that they live in today, how many of those are below, have incomes below 30% of the statistical area's AMI, which is actually a higher number, so about $30,000 a year. It is 77%. 77% of all households who cannot afford their home in the city of Cincinnati, renters and owners, have an income of $30,000 a year or less. And so the question that you have to ask yourself is what we are doing as a city boldly responding to that problem? So the need is clearly defined. There's no discrepancy in it. And I want, so I'm going to point out in 2018, after a couple of years of trying, we eventually got the city of Cincinnati to pass an ordinance that established the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, 2018. And that ordinance specified that funding, all of it must be used to benefit households at 60% of the area median income or lower, with at least half going to 30% of the median income or lower. Because again, that's where the need is, as we already discussed. And the fact is that yes, the city is doing more, having more talk about affordable housing now than in the past, which is good, and it makes sense. You know, we got 10,000 people to get signature, sign something in the middle of a pandemic about affordable housing, so it makes sense the city would be talking about it more. And there are some folks within the city, certainly the staff of the Department of Community and Economic Development are working hard to develop affordable housing with all of the tools that are available to them and are committed to doing so. And some members of council are committed too. But the fact is that in that fund, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, there is $1,300, $1,300. It's been in existence since 2018. And yes, there is other money that is in another fund. And what we have to be clear about is that the other fund allows spending on housing that is affordable at up to 100% of the area median income. So that means it can benefit households with incomes as high as $100,000 a year. $100,000 a year. And so the argument has been made by some that, well, in order for a building to be more sustainable, we may need some rents in that building that are higher than others, right, to make up the difference. And that's true, totally true, makes sense, it's logical. The fact is, however, that the market naturally is producing rents that are affordable at about 80% of the median income. So that means when we put our money into development to support housing affordable at higher than 80%, we're just kind of giving money away because the market already does it. The market is already doing that. And just, I'm going to leave all of that aside. I'm going to point out that most of the funds we've talked about are one-time funds. They're loans. They have to be paid back. But the real question just again boils down to, are we responding to the need in a capacity that is adequate? So let me just talk a little bit more about that. On a daily basis, nearly 90% of families with children that seek shelter are turned away. That means almost every single family with a child that seeks shelter in our city on a daily basis is turned away. And that is despite the fact that our shelters are working 24/7. They never close their doors. They never stop working. The reason is because there are so many people losing their homes that there's just simply not enough room. Last year, we had at least 168 people who died young. Their average age was 52, who died young because they experienced homelessness in our community. It was about 153 the year before that. The of 30, again, of all people, all households who cannot afford their home today, 77% of them have an income of $30,000 a year or less. And so what we are proposing, and the we is a big we, there are many organizations involved, is we are proposing to really fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And to do so even with even more targeting than we anticipated back in 2018. So we are proposing to utilize a 0.3% earnings tax, earned income tax. So until before 2020, the earned income tax rate in our city was 2.1%. So that means we all paid 2.1% of our earnings to the city. And 0.3% of that went to fund public transportation. And in 2020, we as people voted to move the funding for the public transportation over to the county. And so that ended the collection of that 0.3%. And so what we are simply saying is, let's just restore the earned income tax rate to what it was in 2020. And in fact, that 0.3% had been collected since 1972. We just want to go back to what we had collected, except this time, put it into affordable housing. And that would generate somewhere between $40 and $50 million every year, every single year. And this is how it would be divided. At least 65% of those funds would go to develop and preserve and operate housing affordable at 30% of the median income or lower, because that's where the need is. So at least 65% of those monies, that's over 30 million a year if you're starting with 50. And then up to 25%, up to 30% of those funds could go to any of the following: the development or preservation of housing affordable at up to 50% of the area median income. It could also go to keeping homeowners in their homes, homeowners that have an income as high as 80%, keeping them in their homes through paying down indebtedness, repairing their homes, getting them up to code. Think of seniors who have worked hard to own their homes, are afraid of losing them. And then it could also go to creating new home ownership opportunities for people with incomes as high as 80%. And that really, one great place to look is Housing Opportunities Made Equals Roadmap to Black Home Ownership. And then finally, up to 5% could go to administering the funds so that there would be robust administration and efficient work would be done. There would be a board appointed by the city council, which would have folks on it who have experienced the problem and people who know about lending money and doing development. There would be opportunity every year for the general public to engage with the city staff and with that board to say what is going great, what isn't going great, and to be a part of setting priorities for the next year. There would be a minimum, the board and city would set a minimum percentage of units developed that must be accessible by people with disabilities. And in all cases, priority must go to people who are a part of a protected class that has historically been discriminated against in the way of redlining, disproportionate eviction, etc. And so we will be collectively collecting 10,000 signatures to put this on the ballot. We can use all sorts of assistance to do this. But what we know is this is the only way. This will not fix the problem. It will not solve the problem. But it is the only way that that regular Cincinnatians, that people experiencing this problem will see a change.
Thank
Where
you.
people, our people, regular people will actually know it happened. We haven't done something like that yet, and we can now. And it can complement everything else that the city is doing. It can complement everything that CDF is doing. It just gets to where the greatest need is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Josh. Okay. I want to have time for questions. What I'm going to do now is start to go through the questions. We have quite a few. And I'm going to ask that our panelists try to keep your answers fairly brief so we can try to get through all the questions. And we do have some comments. We'll try to get to those too. But let me start with the first question. How many units of affordable housing has the city actually added, and how many more are planned? That's probably Jan-Michele or Councilmember Kearney. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying before. Let me pull the number back up. In the past few months, it's been, it's been 437. I think that was the number. Now I don't have that note in front of me, but before this, it's been, like 200 a year.
Okay.
And so we've more than doubled that. And of course, with the now, for example, with the 1.8 million, the first distribution from the fund of funds for the Slater project, that's another 62 units. So that's at 30% or lower AMI, which is, what Josh was saying is our greatest need. So we're really pushing forward with that, and more to come.
That's great. So, and
This is a big priority. Let me also say that a big issue, and I get, what Josh is doing. We've done a lot of talking. We've been on calls at one point every 2 weeks about it. And, we all have the same goal. We all have the goal of increasing affordable housing, especially for those lower income levels. One thing the mayor has done and about that 0.3, percent for the earnings tax is he's appointed the Mueller Commission, and they're just kind of getting started, because we just have a lot of issues to think about, affordable housing being one of the top ones, but there are many. And so we're trying to be responsible and, get a lot done for a lot of different needs in the city. So the Mueller Commission is just kind of getting started with how we're going to increase revenue. So I just want to say that's in process. Also that with the carryover budget, the mayor put more money into the HELP program, and that's money for home repairs, because as Josh is pointing out, that's so important. You get a home and then you lose it because you can't keep it up. Repairs are super expensive, and so there's more money now from the city for that. There's also the harbor program that the city has, and that's when your home has a code violation. We don't want people losing their homes because there's a code violation. We want them to have funds to actually keep them up, and that's all part of keeping people in their homes. Also in the carryover budget, the mayor put more money in eviction prevention. I think it was Kevin who mentioned that some of those ARP funds are actually running out. And knowing that, the mayor is saying we need to increase this fund, and that's prevention. That's what Kevin was talking about, that we need funds for prevention. And so city council passed that, it was the mayor's initiative to get more money out there, and also increase funding for legal aid so that people could also get attorneys and really get the help they need so they can stay in their homes. So those things are, the city's being really aggressive in this area, and that's a plus.
Good. Yeah, eviction's important. I mean, we have to prevent evictions to prevent some of the homelessness. And so I think that's a very important part of the fund. Next question, probably Robbie. So how is the fund of funds, since CDF is the one managing it, responsible to the public, since mostly private monies are going into it?
Great question. And I would like to just state that all of the funds that we have, regardless of where they're coming from, have some level of reporting that we have to do, and basically to provide impact and determine if we are actually providing what we stated we would do when we took the funds. So we have to provide statistics on every deal we're doing using the funds that have been provided us from whatever foundation. And then also too, we have to provide information to the city on the funds that we're using, of those funds that are coming from the city. So we are required to provide impact reports on every single dollar that we receive. And there are compliance requirements for all of it as well. So it's not necessarily that the public sees the outcomes, but the foundations that provide the fundings definitely do. And we are required to provide extensive reporting on all the dollars that we get from all of the private sources.
Is there a way that the public could see those reports if they wanted on how the funding is used? Because I think that's what the question was.
And since those are not our funds, we cannot determine whether or not they will be released by any of the foundations. That's not our call. The foundations that are providing the dollars would have to determine whether or not they want those funds or those statistics released.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, how sustainable is getting funding from multiple sources that are not recurring sources?
I'll try to tackle that a little bit.
Okay.
As I mentioned, Suicide Development Fund has been around several years, and we have always received funds from different sources. It's proven to be, in some cases, very sustainable because we've been getting these funds to operate for all these years, but we've also had to pivot and determine where we needed to go to get different funding. So We started out with getting funds from financial institutions to do the work in areas where the banks could not lend due to their regulations. CDF is a non-regulated bank, so we don't have the examiners to look at our work the same way that banks do. We have our work is reviewed, do not get me wrong, but it's not at the same level as a traditional bank. So we've looked at different places to get funding over the years. We've been doing that quite well, and we've amassed different sources, and we will continue to do that. But it's proven to be very sustainable over 30 years.
Thank you.
Susan, I would actually argue that that's the nature of running a nonprofit.
Yeah.
Sustainable ongoing funding is the exception, not the rule. You're always having to find the next resource.
And we are a nonprofit.
Right. And all of us in nonprofits understand that completely. So next question. Funding through Cincinnati Development Fund. What track record of development does a minority contractor have to have in order to get funding? Does a minority contractor need some kind of a track record to apply for funding through you?
So I was very excited to see that question. And so here's the thing, we work with very new, not as seasoned contractors, all the way up to the ones who have been doing this for a long time. The program that we created last year was strictly based on looking at those organizations who not necessarily had a great track record or a long track record. Many of our minority developers who are requesting funding from us now are coming from a program called the Urban Land Institute Real Estate Accelerator Lab program. And these folks, a lot of them are brand new to the industry. But what we do is we provide technical assistance so that they can get into this work. So some of them don't have a lot of track history at all with us. A lot of it has to do with what they've been doing in their previous lives, what their business plan looks like, and how we can work with them going forward.
Let me just add that, that's an excellent program. Robie does a lot of great work with ULI and training developers. I mean, that, and as I think Kevin and Josh both mentioned, that getting these smaller developers into the affordable housing, renovation and construction is really going to help us move that needle as well. And so that is super important. It's a great program. I hope more folks sign up for it. The other thing is that, the city understands that a big obstacle to getting larger projects is bonding. And so, we have a new council member, Seth Walsh, who comes from the College Hill Development Corporation. And so he's got some great ideas. We're working together on that about how the city can help these smaller companies get bonding. You have to, once you get it for the first time, it's easier going forward, but getting bonding the first time is super hard. The other thing is access to capital. And so we're establishing a fund for these smaller and minority and women-owned businesses so that, they'll have that cash flow. So all that's going to help move the needle. Someone asked about how many units. It's going to help us get move the needle faster in terms of getting more affordable housing units.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Kearney. So recent reports have shown rent in Cincinnati has increased nearly 40%. I know in some of the cities it's increased even more. Cincinnati loses more than 1,000 Black residents every year, many to India and Nashville. How does the city measure the loss of affordable housing? I wonder if it means the loss of people. When will the fund of funds start creating and sustaining more funds than are lost each year? Or more units? When will the fund start creating more units than are lost each year?
I know that LISC did some work about how many units were lost, and I'm sorry, I just don't have that information in front of me. But feel free to email me. I'll try to track that down for you. I mean, those numbers are actually out there.
Okay.
And I want to sort of share my thoughts on this. So we provide the funding, but we don't do the development. So to determine when the fund of funds is going to start replacing more than we lose, I don't know if I have a good answer for that, because we are not the developer.
Yeah.
We do know that there are significant numbers of developments in place right now, but they don't all go on the time frame that they're supposed to for a lot of reasons.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure I can really provide a good answer for that, because we are not the developer, we are the funder.
And with the supply chain issues and other issues that we've had since the pandemic, it's really hard to predict anything when projects will be finished. Next question, are there examples of other cities doing interesting things in affordable housing? Anybody who would like to answer that?
I can
Oh,
give,
sure. Oh, okay, Josh, go ahead. I was going to mention Columbus, so go ahead.
sure. So there are, there are about 400 funded trust funds across the country, that many of which target the incomes that we're talking about. And one comparison would be in Baltimore. We've collaborated with some of the folks there that put funding on their ballot. There's also Pittsburgh is another example, just to name a couple.
Okay. Anybody else? I know there are tiny homes being built in some cities.
Yeah, there are actually lots of things being tried. I can tell you, Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner really wanted his legacy to be getting rid of homelessness. And so he has the Housing First program. It's been around 25 years. And it's a great model to say, it doesn't matter, what other issues you have going on, we're going to get you in housing first. That's, priority. And so there, in Houston, there's a big push for that. We have some housing first projects here. Mary Burke Rivers and her group are going to do Dunlap House, and they did. I'm drawing a blank on the name nearby. Oh gosh, I can't think of the name of but we do have some housing first models here where we get people into affordable housing, and then help with other issues. So I think that's really exciting. Dunlap House, I think it's going to have 44 units, and the city just approved that last month.
That is a great project.
If I might just add, developments such as Dunlap, in almost every development that has affordable housing, and certainly any form of supportive housing, takes probably about 5 years to take from concept to breaking ground at best.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because of lack of funds. And so, it's easy to think about all sorts of, kind of catchy things that places may be doing, but the truth of the matter is that any place that is having more success with affordable housing is because they have directed large sums of money to where the need is specifically. We can't idea our way out of it.
Yeah.
I would actually argue that Josh sugarcoated that one a little bit. I would love to see a project get done in only 5 years. Good God, that's actually really fast compared to how long it takes some projects to get developed. I would add to what Josh said about the lack of funding. That is 100% on the mark. But I also think, for whatever reason, the NIMBYism issues, not in my backyard, seems to be a little more intense here than it is in some other cities.
Yep.
So I would ask this group, if you know of a site for a good affordable housing project, particularly a supportive housing project, to reach out to probably any one of us on the panel and let it point us in that direction. Because the big issue a lot of times is just getting community support. The community immediately around the project, if they're not supportive, it's not going to happen. So finding communities that are welcoming of affordable housing can be a challenge as well.
That's a great point. Kevin, next question's for you. For the people you talked about that have the deposit and 3 months rent in their hands, if they can't find an affordable unit or they can't get approved for a unit, what kind of outreach to housing providers are you offering to address those concerns?
System-wide, there are a number of efforts to address that. We employ 4 housing specialists whose full-time job it is to just try to find those units and engage with property owners to help people find units that they can move into. And we're not the only organization in this space that has gone in the direction of employing housing specialists who that's really their role. We are, on behalf of the 20 organizations that we work most closely with and that receive the HUD funding, also in the next couple months, Vice Mayor, I know this is something myself and your staff have spoken about. We're trying to kick off a more comprehensive property owner engagement effort to try to reach out to property owners in the community and make the argument for why they should make at least some portion of units they have both affordable and available to people who are at high risk of homelessness or even exiting homelessness. So we are trying to do some coordinated efforts to engage property owners in a way we have not in the past. But, that's sort of a necessary based on how much tighter the housing market has gotten in recent years.
Let me just add to it. Thanks, Kevin, for mentioning that. Let me just add that, another issue, and this is really related, is finding, we need more affordable units, but also sometimes it's just hard to find where they are. For example, you mentioned that when someone has, rent and their, deposit in hand. And so this happened, we saw this at Ross Avenue, where they got a vacate order because of problems with the building. And they were saying they didn't have anywhere to go. And so they would get a list of landlords. I think there were like 1,500 on the list, and they had to call them to see, who had units available. And so the city is looking into how can we help with that? How can we kind of keep an ongoing database to help? Because, there's no help in actually finding the home. There's help in getting the funds for it. And so how can we, and we're going to work with, hopefully we're going to work with Kevin and Josh on this one. This is what's been talked about to kind of make it easy for residents to find what's available. Because that's, you just don't have time, when you're in that crisis, to just start calling all these landlords. So.
Okay. What I'm going to say is, it's almost time, but I'm going to keep going through some questions. Anybody who has to get off, is it okay? Are you the panelists okay with staying on for a few more minutes?
Sure, I can.
Okay. We have a couple of statements. I'm going to go beyond those to the next question, and they're interesting statements. So maybe we can put those when we send you all an email about the recorded program. We can put some of the chat statements in there. So there was a question: is there an entity in Cincinnati that will accept a donation of a house for the sole purpose of affordable housing? And Councilman Kearney answered that question. Yes, there is. Price Hill has a homestead program, and they will accept donations of housing. So if anybody has a house to donate, well, that would be great.
Yeah, Price Hill, well, their homestead program is something else we need to replicate across the city. And they work with Santa Maria Services. So Santa Maria actually, vets the person that wants to be the homeowner. And generally, of course, there are people who can't get conventional loans, but they do show that they're able to save some money. And so I think they have to save $1,000 or something. It's not astronomical, but they have to show they can save that much. And then they go to working in neighborhoods for financial literacy, home ownership classes. And then they go to Price Hill Will, and Price Hill Will takes that home, they stabilize it, and then the homeowner, beautifies it. Price Hill Will make sure that the plumbing works, electricity, roof is good, that kind of thing. And then the homeowner steps in, and after 5 years, they owe nothing. And so they pay on it for 5 years, and then it's theirs mortgage free. So, it's a great program, and they look for people, they get some houses out of the port, but some are actually donated. And, with these out of town investors buying up inventory, it's becoming really hard. And so, we're working on what we can do about that. And we don't have the answer yet, but we are working on it.
Okay. Next question, why did the city transfer its funds to CDF instead of managing themselves?
Oh, because CDF is the expert. I mean, you definitely want a good fund manager. Robbie and her group are the experts in managing funds. I mean, this is what they do.
Yeah.
They know how to invest them. And so that's, that is really a big help to the city.
That's-
It's kind of like saying, why do you put your money in a bank instead of putting it under your mattress?
That's That's a good analogy.
And I would also say too that it becomes an expense as well for the city because they'd have to hire people to do this. Whereas as a partner with the city, we can do that without the city having to, do something different than they had been doing. So I just think it makes sense to use the people who are already there versus to, develop a whole program.
All right, more, right. How many of the units done by the fund of funds were for 100% and 120% of median income?
Yeah, I saw that question and I don't have an answer for that one. I can certainly, so the fund of fund is new. So we haven't been doing a lot with those funds. It was just really funded towards the end of the year and then, still working with some of the funds that are coming in. I can tell you what we have done since the fund has been established, but a lot of the things that I talk about are work that we've been doing throughout the years with all the funds that we have from all the different sources. So I'm happy to see what I can find out just since that was completed, but that's going to be a really low amount because the fund has not been established that long.
Let me just add too, though, I talked to our assistant city manager about that. And I said, can these funds be used at those higher levels? And he said, no, that, our contract with the Cincinnati Development Fund is for 80% or lower with the emphasis on 60% or lower. And so it's 0 for 100%, 0 for 120%. And there's, I was going to say that just to show you the amount per unit, the maximum, and this is for the loan. This might be too much information, but just so you know, for example, like up to 80%, it's 25,000 per unit. But if you go like 60% or lower, then and that's for a 2-bedroom, it's 50% per unit. But the point is to put more emphasis on the 60% or lower units, but it's not for the 100 or the 120%. It's what I've been told.
Okay.
No, that's correct.
Excuse me.
Yeah. And I want to thank so that must be Jeff who said, that's Josh. Okay. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's Janet. Janet Buning was saying as president of the club, she's impressed by the passion and knowledge of the presenters. I just want
Well, actually, that was Jeff Dye, who is president of the club currently.
Oh, yeah, because I said, you're president, Jeff, so. And
Yeah.
Janet's a past president.
She would say the same, but.
Okay.
And this is why Women's City Club was established back in 1915. And if in case anyone doesn't know, it's the Women's City Club who actually created the first planning department in the country. So it was right here in Cincinnati. And so we have a really good planning department in the city.
That's true. You know the history. So
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Next question. You talked about $1.8 million the city recently put into affordable
For Slater, yeah.
housing,
For Slater House, yeah.
52 units. Okay.
At
That
30% or lower AMI. So that's really key.
so he says that would be about $4,600 per unit. How can new units be built for that amount? I think there's some typos, so I'm not sure if I got that question right, Bill Joyner. But
So that could be, yeah. So I mean, that's because the Cincinnati Development Fund is financing that, with the
Gap
fund of
funding?
funds.
I mean, it's getting supplementary funding from the, I'm sorry, I don't understand.
some gap funding.
Yeah, so the Cincinnati Development Fund this is the first project from the fund of funds that's being funded. So the Cincinnati Development, through the Cincinnati Development Fund, right? Because they've got our fund of funds. So they're giving 1.8, it's actually something like 1.88 something, about, 1.8, 1.9 million for this Slater project. And these are 62 units at 30% AMI or lower. And that's the area that Josh was saying.
That's
What we need.
buying a unit for $30,000. I don't see how you can construct a unit for $30,000. What
Well,
kind of,
the actual cost of construction, and so, that's what Robbie was saying, the cost of construction is the same, whether, the rent is, lower or higher, it's still the same to construct it. It's a matter of financing that project. And that's really what Fund of Funds is for. I'm sorry, Robbie, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that 1.8, that was the gap amount, not the project cost.
The gap amount, yeah.
That was just the gap.
okay.
Yeah, so Mr. Joyner, that was the gap, not the whole thing.
Okay, thank you. So the study that showed that there was a need for 28,000 affordable housing units is several years old. So evidence indicates homelessness has increased since then. Should the city commission a new study? Kevin might know that. The answer to that, right? Has homelessness increased since that study?
No, you gotta define what you're qualifying here. So, as I said before, we've actually had a modest decrease in homelessness during the pandemic due to the presence of all that COVID funding. But that was a very narrow definition of homelessness. That is people who are on the street, in a shelter, or fleeing domestic violence. Does not include people who may have lost their own housing and are now living in doubled up situations and things like that. So the numbers look a little different depending on what criteria you're using for who you're counting.
If I might just lend some perspective, agreeing with what Kevin said, because housing and urban development doesn't include you as being without a home if you're not in a shelter or you're not living outdoors or escaping domestic violence, that means that when you have less affordable housing, people in shelter have less opportunity to leave shelter, which means that beds stay full and there's less opportunity for new people to come in those beds, which can have the effect of it looking like there's less people experiencing homelessness, whereas in fact, there's just less beds available. That's part of the nuance.
Thank you.
Well, the number of calls that the CAP line gets has certainly increased over time, hasn't it? And as you say, a lot of people that call that can't get housing.
When you really want to get into the nuance, you really get into nuance when you talk about CAP, because what CAP is doing is prioritizing people based on whether or not they can stay where they've been sleeping for one more night or two more nights, and in theory, bringing people into shelter who don't have any place to sleep tonight, while the people being turned away are being turned away because they could stay where they've been staying for at least one more night. So you get into a lot of subtlety about some of these numbers when you look at them really closely, because the people who called CAP but were not placed into shelter didn't necessarily need a shelter bed that night. So there's a lot of subtlety to wade through.
Thank you. I'm feeling guilty about keeping our presenters for so long. There's a lot more questions, and I'm wondering if there's a way that we could send these questions to the panel and
we can certainly do that, and we can then, because we always send to everybody who's registered for the session, so we can send whatever responses we get and any other links to. There was a question in the chat earlier about is Robbie's PowerPoint available, and I don't know if it is. If it is, then we could include that as a material that we send out to people that have participated in this as well.
Right.
I think the question was, can I put it on the site? And
right on the site, that's correct.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, not to send it to us, but to put it on the CDF site, right?
And I just want to say to that is this PowerPoint has been cannibalized so much. So we would have to, I would have to ask what the official one we'd like to have placed out or that we can share. This one, I'm sure I could share with with you all here since I presented it, but it was a quite much longer version than what I shared with you. So, but we're glad to share information if you'd like to have that, certainly.
I think, yeah, some of the information would be great. Do you want me to ask a few more questions, or are you guys ready to go to bed?
It's too early for bed.
Going.
I'll ask a few more. Public dollars are limited. Those limited dollars need to go where the need is. Developers who are saying they're doing affordable housing at 80% and above are not reaching the most need. Doesn't it make sense to have a dedicated source that reaches those in need?
Hey, let me talk about this. And I wasn't really on this side of the argument. Josh and I were actually on the same side with this. We had 5 million in the carryover budget that I think it was Councilmember Victoria Parks and Johnson and I wanted to have, kind of like with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That was at Fund 439, saying 60% or lower, than half had to go to 30% or lower. But here's what, and so Josh and I were, we were going back, he was supporting me in that, and I really appreciate it. We didn't win that argument because the argument is that because it's so expensive developing lower rent units, sometimes it's better to have a project that has the higher, like the 80%, and and then include the 30% with that, instead of just saying it's got to be 60% or lower. And so that was the argument for not having that kind of restriction, that we might end up getting more affordable units if we didn't make it that restrictive, just because of the financing is really so difficult. And so that's really the answer. That wasn't what I was arguing, but my argument, Josh and I were, like trying to do something different. But I can understand that logic though, and so I think that's really the answer there.
Okay.
If I might just add, Vice Mayor Kearney's correct that was the argument, that if you have rents in a building that are, say, affordable at 80% of the median income, then those higher rents can help offset your rental income loss from having units at 30% of the median income, right? That's logical and is true. That doesn't mean, however, that we have to put our public funds into housing at 80% of AMI. In fact, because the market already produces housing at that level. And so that is not where we need to put our funds. And it's sort of, you do have to apply some common sense. If somebody out there, and I'm not pinning this on the vice mayor at all, because, like she said, we were working together, so she's just the messenger. But if somebody out there tells you, look, we can get more units affordable at 30% of AMI by investing money in 80% of AMI instead of investing all of it in 30%. You might want to question what they're saying, because that just is illogical. It's just basically illogical. I get more out of putting some of my money over here instead of putting all of it where I need it. It doesn't make sense.
Well, but just to add to that though, Josh, and so, and I'm not a developer, so, but my understanding is that just because the financing is so difficult, that the restrictions would keep that from happening. But let me just say, whenever, developers come before us, and they're talking about market rate housing, we say, can you get some affordable housing in there? Can you work that out? Because you're talking about market rate housing. Let's make mixed income housing. That really helps us more. And so the last developer that came before us that was talking about market rate housing said he would go back to the drawing board and see if he could make it work. So I don't have the answer yet, but he said he is trying to work on that so that he can include affordable housing. And I said, please do that before it gets to city council, because we're going to be, a lot more interested in this project and a lot more supportive if you've got affordable housing included in it.
Can I say something? There's no inclusionary housing policy at this point, though, that requires a developer to do a certain number. I mean, that's the problem. They can all say, oh, I don't have the money to do that, or whatever. So people that are doing 80 and 120%, they're not even willing to do the 30% because they're not required to by some kind of policy that could give them some incentives probably to do it. So that's what's lacking.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right.
Thank you, Bonnie.
So it's all, but it's all, it's all a work in progress. And so
Yeah.
where we talked about, the mandatory, the inclusionary policy several years ago, maybe that's something we can still work toward. It doesn't mean it's off the table. We don't have it now, but it's not necessarily off the table. And I noticed in Columbus, I'm pretty sure the mayor, when he did that 3-tier system, I think he just now amended it. And I need to go back and actually look at that, but I think he just now amended it so that there has to be affordable housing with the tiers that are getting tax abatements, but don't really need the investment. So that's just something I recently saw. And I said, that's interesting. I really need to check that out.
I mean, I think, we'd all like everything to happen at once, but it doesn't. And so we appreciate the progress that we're making and know there's a lot more progress to go. Next one is for you, Jan-Michele. It's thanking you for the lawsuit to expose some of the landlords who have, done some terrible things to tenants and how weak tenants are to defend themselves. So will the city be advancing any new tenant protections in the city ordinance as part of the larger push, to protect tenants? And if so, what's being considered?
Yeah, there's a lot that's being considered there. A lot of often our hands are tied by state law. And so that's kind of a wall we often run into. For example, I wanted to, there were a lot of people being put out of their homes for these developments. This was probably last year. And, they were in City Hall a lot. And I thought, we need to make it kind of like Seattle does, where you have to give 90 days notice before you do that. And then we were saying, return security deposit. You don't really need it, because you're going to, develop this property anyway, but the tenant's going to need that. You have to give them so much money, moving expenses and first month's rent, because it's expensive. It's expensive to move because these folks were being given 30 days notice. And then it's like, well, wait a minute, state law says you only have to give them 30 days notice. So that kind of didn't work. But so a lot of it is looking at what we can legally do. And so everybody's really looking at that. And so there are lots of different ideas coming out there. And we also look to see what other cities are doing that our law department has to see. Is that legal in Ohio? Can we do that? So it's definitely a work in progress. There's a lot to do. It's not always as easy as saying, we're just going to, make this the law, because you bump up against state laws a lot. Okay,
thank you. So
same thing with gun legislation. That's, another issue. But I can say one thing we are doing, as I said, the mayor is like, let's increase code enforcement, so he's putting more money into that for these out of town landlords that are coming in, like the Williamsburg landlords, and just making a mess, just making a total mess. So let's increase the fine so that it's not so easy to just ride it out and let people live in really terrible conditions.
Please understand too, I'm going to skip a couple of questions. Anything that has even a slight tone of a political either way, I'm skipping because we are a nonprofit. And I want to get on to this next question because I think it's something people may not know about. Project in Texas that built small houses called Loaves and Fishes. The cost of the units was around $20,000, and it was actually its own little village. So I think part of the big problem is finding a place to do it, but is that anything that we have thought of?
Yeah, this idea keeps popping up about tiny houses. And so I think several people have been looking at that. That's an interesting idea.
NIMBYism. NIMBYism.
Oh, that's right. No, but
We've
that's
been
what I was-
looking at those ideas for
Yeah.
decades, and find me a neighborhood where the neighbors don't get all up in arms saying that that's going to negatively impact their property values.
Yeah.
NIMBYism.
that was what I thought, Kevin, when I said finding a place to do it. But it would be wonderful if we could, because it is a great idea. They support each other. They have a community building, and anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the one that, you know, I think it would have moved forward, except nobody wants to take that punch to the face because, I mean, the Commons at South Cumminsville that National Church Residences opened 2 years ago is a beautiful $12 million building, nicer than any place I have ever lived. It took 9 years to pull that off because people thought that was going to decrease their property values, and that place is gorgeous. What kind of resistance are we going to run into when we try to build tiny homes someplace? That's the problem.
That's the point.
Also, you know, let me
Yeah,
just say, as someone who, you know, I was with Seth Walsh, who's our new council member, and also Kate Green, who's the new director of the College Hill Kirk. And they were, you know, we were going through looking at their properties and how they acquire ownership of properties. They keep them at lower rents and fix them up. And, you know, for example, Hollywood Apartments there on Hamilton used to be just a mess. But, you know, College Hill Development Corporation, which is the College Hill Kirk, you know, acquired them, fixed them up, let the tenants know, you know, we're fixing your apartments. We're going to make it really nice. We've got this nice, you know, outdoor area, but the rents are not going up because, you know, they're not trying to make a profit. And so we need more of that model. So I think College Hill is kind of, in fact, I think south of North Bend, all of there, and this is kind of at the line there, like they said maybe like 98% of the units are affordable housing, they're 60% or lower, and a lot of them are like 30%. And so, you know, they've got a good plan in College Hill, and that's something we should look at across the city. And you know, we actually are looking at it.
You can never underestimate what people will oppose. I recently was having a conversation with a friend who lives on the east side who was reminding me that there was an opposition to a condominium development where the condos are now selling for $1.2 million. But at the time it was built, people were opposed to that. So, you know, people will oppose just about anything if it impacts their neighborhood. And so some of these good ideas don't really get a start because of some of that resistance.
Well, you know, yeah, that's right. But, you know, I have found, and I think we're finding on council, that community engagement is a huge help, because it used to be, and some people still feel this way, that folks come into their neighborhoods and just kind of roll over residents. But I think engaging the community and trying to get understanding about, you know, what's coming, how it's going to affect you, you know, looking at data can go a lot. And I'm not saying it's the answer, but it definitely helps, because residents need to have a say in what's happening. And I think with more understanding and more education, information, that it really helps a lot.
If I might add, as we started out the meeting, in our city, we're short 28,000 affordable units. And so to fill that gap, certainly we will have to employ all different forms of housing. It could be tiny homes. It could be empowering people who rent now to collectively buy the building they own it, to empower mom and pop landlords to expand in their neighborhoods, to empower people who have great ideas in the neighborhoods, but not the capital to pull it off, and many other ideas. But the bottom line is, it all will take a lot of money to do it. And those 28,000 units are needed at 30% of the median income or lower.
So next question, some affordable housing is well beyond the 16 years required to get the initial construction. Are there any funds for maintenance and rehab of older units? For instance, Hamilton gives forgivable loans to replace roofs, cabinet, washers, water heaters that are now 20 years old.
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit earlier that we do have the home repair, the help program that the mayor has just put more money into so that there's more help for home repairs, because home repairs can be very expensive. And so that's a big plus. And he took money from the carryover budget and put that there. And there, as I said, there's also Harbor. A lot of people just don't realize we have these programs. Harbor is when you have a code violation. The help program, you don't need a code violation. You just need this home repair to actually fix up your home.
I just want to remind everyone that the county itself has 12,000 affordable housing that it needs. So there's certainly a lot of homelessness in the county. The county also has more land. It may have more resistance to development of affordable housing. But why isn't the city and the county talking to each other about the problem?
Yeah.
Well, we are. The county, Mr. Joyner put 33.5 million into this, into the Cincinnati Development Fund. It's part of the fund of funds. The county and city actually are doing a lot better about working together. We're all, kind of friends. The commissioners and the council people, we all know each other and have a really good working relationship.
Last two questions. Are you all aware of a policy some owners are enforcing calling Rhino? This is adding additional burdens on our tenants for monies adjacent to their rent. What can be done? I'm not sure what that question means.
Could the person with that question explain that?
Yeah, if I might speak. So this has just come up recently in the Westwood neighborhood. This is it's a policy that some of the owners, and these are larger property owners, are requiring of their renters. So I went online just to do a little more exploring. It was developed to take the place of someone needing a large deposit to get into an apartment. So for some people, they start out with a $99 fee, and then there is a rated fee each month that's supposed to be like the deposit being paid to the owner. However, at the end of your rental agreement, there's nothing for the tenant. And I believe that the owner gets some type of a tick from this group. Rhino is an insurance company. So this is called deposit insurance.
Yeah.
Along
I'm really
with
glad
that,
you brought that up. I'm not familiar with that, Ms. Brackman, but I'm definitely going to look it up.
it's scary, and we did hear about it, or we spoke about it briefly in a meeting last week with one of the representatives from Home, because there's also a tie-in to renters insurance that the tenant is required to get through the same insurance company. In my particular case, my neighbor had made the deposit. She's paying an additional $20 fee per month and a $30 fee per month.
Okay, Deborah just said it's the security deposit insurance that was voted in and forced upon housing providers.
Yeah, if I might add, and I can't remember every single detail, but before the pandemic, I don't remember the exact year, city council passed an ordinance that ended up bringing this to our city. And I cannot describe it more than that at this point, but that's where it came from. And it was supposed to be security deposit insurance. But even at that time, many of us said this is going to cause big problems.
I'm not familiar with that at all, so I'll definitely check into it.
I'm sorry, can I speak, or is that not okay?
I believe that the website is say, S-A-Y, Rhino, R-H-I-N-O. I believe it's .org.
Yeah, that's correct.
sayrhino.org.
Okay, thank you. I know Councilmember Kearney will check into that for us.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Maybe we
Definitely.
can put some
Yeah.
information when we send out that email to all of you. Last question. What if we designated the tiny house village for senior living only? It appears that some neighborhoods are more receptive when a particular demographic for housing is identified.
Well, that gets back to community engagement. I mean, I think, I think bringing a new idea, folks, are kind of resistant at first, and then you educate them and say how this will affect you. It's not going to hurt your property values. Everything's going to be fine. These will be great neighbors. This will be a plus for the city, but helping people to understand what it is we're trying to do and to get input. And even, do some tweaks to policies as residents require. So it's, we have to work together. That's the thing. It's hard to impose things on folks without getting feedback. That's why, earlier I invited all of you to the Equitable Housing Committee on January 31st, next Tuesday at 1, because we're going to talk about this 3-tiered policy. Some people love it, some people hate it. Some people have questions about it. And the whole point is we're trying to make the tax abatements equitable. And so we want, we definitely want input on it. And so this is why community engagement is just really important.
That's great. I can't thank our panelists enough for their endurance tonight. It's been absolutely wonderful. We still have 51 people on. That's amazing. I'm going to turn it over quickly to Jeff to end the program. And again, thank you. We so appreciate everybody's input tonight.
Susan, do you mind me just saying, as a city rep here, Josh and Kevin and Robbie are invaluable partners with the city. I appreciate all of them, love all 3 of them. They are just so great. And it's just an honor to be on the panel with them. And, Women's City Club, you guys are really awesome. So thank you.
Now, that's why we chose the 4 of you, because you are the best. So thank you so much. Jeff, do you have anything to say?
Well, put a lot of what I wanted to say in the chat just to make sure that it got out there, because I didn't know how long we were going to go and if everybody could stay on, but I'm impressed at everybody's ability to stay on. It's just wonderful. I did want to remind everybody that we have a National Speaker Forum coming up on March 23rd at Memorial Hall. And that is Marcia Coyle discussing a look. I've typed a looking inside the Supreme Court. I meant a look inside the Supreme Court. And also our February forum will be with Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, former Justice Maureen O'Connor. She's agreed. We haven't settled the date yet. And as soon as we know that, we will send that information out. So really excited about how much enthusiasm everybody shared, both the panelists and the attendees, with phenomenal amounts of information and engagement. And I think that's what we've dreamt of in being involved in this organization. We really look for that kind of engagement, and we're seeing it. So I guess one other quick plug is we have a social justice action group that some of you might be interested in getting involved in if you're wanting to participate in more activities around advocating like this. And thanks everyone, and thanks to our panelists, and have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.